Alright, welcome everybody to workshop number 1. My name is Asim and I want to thank everybody for watching. This is going to be an overview of CSUs, UCs, and private schools. So again, CSUs are California State Universities. UCs are the University of California System schools. This is the first workshop in a series of 4 workshops where you're going to learn a little bit about some potential schools you might apply to. You're going to learn about essay writing, how to brainstorm, how to edit, and then eventually how to fill out the rest of the application in terms of giving your statistics, giving your awards, honors, extracurriculars, all that stuff. But before we go any further, really the first thing we need to do in this workshop is determine your college list. So this workshop is all going to be about determining your college list and some schools and things you should keep in mind as you work through that. First things first, congratulations. It is a huge deal to be committing yourself to higher level education and really taking the first step by watching a video like this and pursuing more information about how you can increase your chances and really find the best fit for you. So congratulations on that. Let's get started. So we're going to start with CSUs, or California State Universities. They are public institutions or public universities, which means they're funded by the state of California. There's 23 total institutions within California, which means you can apply to a variety of them in terms of location, and you can kind of have a selection of location. There's Division 1 and 2 athletic programs, so if athletics is an element that's important to you in a campus, whether it's participating or watching, so a strong sports culture, then there's definitely a variety to choose from when it comes to CSUs. The difficulty of entry really is based on the campus, and we'll look at a chart in the next slide which may give some insight into that. One thing to keep in mind is that CSUs tend to be less selective than UC campuses, and we'll kind of talk about how the application process works to CSUs versus UCs and why they are less selective. The really cool thing about CSUs, and same thing with UCs, is that they operate on a single application. So Cal State Apply is what they operate on, and you fill out an application where you give data and you give statistics about yourself, and then essentially you're able to apply to as many schools as you want to in the CSU system. So this is a chart that I stole from Wikipedia, and basically what it does is it tells you the campus, it tells you the number of people who applied to that school in that particular year, so the number of applicants. Then it tells you the number of admits, so how many people were admitted to the campus, and then it basically gives you the rate. So as you can see, some schools are a little bit more competitive to get into, and some are a little bit easier to get into. System-wide, the average is right around 51–52%. So you really have your selection when it comes to the CSU campuses, but this is something to just kind of look at when we move on to the requirements. So you can pause it here, kind of look at if you were already eyeing campus what the admit rate is like, or you can come back to this later. Alright, moving forward. So some of the requirements for CSUs. CSUs use something known as the Eligibility Index. So there's certain requirements that you have to be eligible to even attend a CSU. First things first, you have to have your specific high school courses accomplished. So this is known as the A through G courses, which many of us know. And if you accomplish your A through G courses, which is most likely if you're watching this video, then you must also graduate from high school. Now, your eligibility index is really based on 2 things. It's based on your grades in A through G courses and the test scores that you receive, whether it's on the ACT or the SAT. So, when a CSU gets your application, what they'll do is they'll take your grades in the A through G courses, they'll take your test scores, and then they'll compile them using an equation into something known as the EI score. And the EI score is the main factor for admission. So that is solely what they look at when they're deciding whether they are going to admit you or not. So the threshold, the EI score, depends for each campus. Some are higher, some are lower. The lower EI score thresholds tend to be the easier campuses to be admitted to. And then the higher EIs tend to be the harder campuses to be admitted to. So that's something really key to keep in mind when it comes to the CSUs. Luckily, no essay is required on the application, so the application is relatively brief and the window is smaller to apply for them because it is brief. In some cases, supplemental information may be required for specific campuses and specific majors that are impacted. Impacted essentially means that more people want to attend that university, so they have a higher number of applicants. Therefore, they're requiring some sort of supplemental information to be required so they can differentiate each one of those applicants. So in some cases, information may be required beyond your grades in A3G courses and your test scores. Average SAT and ACT score really depends on the campus, and that's some individual research you can do to be able to see where you might stand. You use something known as Cal State Apply to apply. That is a single application where you'll be able to apply to multiple CSUs. All right, moving forward, it's always nice to look at the tuition and the fees breakdown before and after applying, because before applying it can be very intimidating. You see some large numbers, $26,000, you're looking at the total. After applying, usually after, financial aid, after you filled out your FAFSA, some grants, scholarships roll in, that number becomes a lot more manageable number to process in your head. But just looking at the tuition, when you compare CSUs to UCs, and especially to private schools, CSUs tend to be the cheapest option. So they tend to be the cheapest option in terms of tuition, in terms of overall. Tuition is really what drives it down the most. Books and supplies, food and housing, transportation, personal, those things tend to be consistent with both the city you are in and consistent with UCs, private schools, and any other school you might apply to. But always good to look. This is for Sacramento, so Sacramento State. This is basically the breakdown for them. All right. So now we're going to move on to the University of California schools, or the UC system. The UC system is also a series of public institutions or universities, which means they're funded by the state of California. There's 9 total institutions, undergraduate institutions: Davis, Berkeley, Santa Cruz, Merced, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, Irvine, Riverside, and San Diego. They offer Division 1, 2, and 3 athletic programs. Again, if sports culture is important to you, or participating in sports is, they offer a variety of sports, a variety of levels you can participate and watch on. The difficulty of entry varies based on campus. Again, just like CSUs, each campus has a different rate of admission. One key thing to keep in mind is that they tend to be more selective than CSU campuses. And they're more selective because they do offer some different resources that, in terms of research, in terms of working with prestigious professors, things of that nature, they do offer some additional services that a CSU may not be able to offer. Like CSUs, a single application connects them all, which is really cool because if there's multiple you want to apply to, you can go ahead and do that. Hopefully after this college list and we look at some of the factors that you should look at when making your college list, you'll minimize that. You don't want to be applying to all of these schools. Not only does it cost money, but you want to apply to the ones that you really see yourself possibly going to. And I mentioned this a little bit, but they are prestigious and they're nationally ranked schools, and they're very reputable in terms of how people see them around the world. CSUs are really intended for California students, although people do come outside of California and attend them. But University of California schools really not only include California students, but students from all over the nation and all over the world. And because of that, they have this advanced diversity. All right, so some of the 2017 statistics. One thing you'll see right away is that UCs are very competitive in terms of the SAT score and the GPA range that they're looking for. That shouldn't scare you at all because these are not hard and fast scores necessarily, or test scores. I know people who've been admitted above and below these rates, who've been rejected above these rates, who've been rejected below these rates. So this is just an average to look at. The UC system uses something known as a holistic approach, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They look at multiple elements of you, not just you in terms of GPA and test scores like the CSUs do. So they look at multiple parts of you because they really want to admit you as an individual, not as you as a pair of statistics, which is really cool and which something I really appreciate about them. So if you look at UC Berkeley and UCLA, they sit around 16 and 17%. San Diego, Santa Barbara, and Irvine are low to mid 30s, and then Davis is about low 40s, and Santa Cruz and Riverside and Merced are 50 plus. So just kind of something to keep in mind. We'll talk about the holistic approach a little bit later, but this is just a cool graphic you can come back and look at if you want to put yourself in one of the kind of brackets. All right, so the requirements for UCs, what do they look like? So first, you need to fulfill your A through G requirements, therefore graduating from high school, and have a minimum GPA of a 3.0, which if you're watching this video, then chances are you probably have accomplished those things and you can be applying to a UC. You also need to meet the examination requirement by taking an SAT or an ACT, just by taking it and submitting it. So most UCs use a holistic approach to evaluate admission. A holistic approach, it asks for things beyond your statistics. So they'll ask for 4 350-word essays, a detailing of test scores and grades, so AP scores, ACT scores, SAT scores if you took one or the other or both, AP scores, I think I already mentioned that, SAT subject scores, things like that. So they'll ask for awards and honors, wherever they might be athletic, beyond that. Community service, leadership. They literally give you a spot to almost put everything. So they want to understand you as a whole person, which is really cool because they want to admit you as a multi-dimensional individual. Looking at this graphic on the right side, the top right corner, something I learned during my own research is that this is for California students. If you're a state resident and you've met the minimum requirements that I mentioned earlier, and you're not admitted to a UC campus to which you applied, you'll be offered a spot at another campus if space is available, provided that you meet one of the two criteria. So you rank in the top 9% of California high school students, according to their admissions index, or you rank in the top 9% of your graduating class. So if you meet one of those requirements and you're not admitted to a UC campus that you apply to, then if space is available, they will give you admission to another campus, typically UC Merced or UC Riverside, in some cases UC Santa Cruz, or a university that has space available. Something also really cool is that here in the UC system, UC Berkeley and UCLA are tied for the #1 ranked public university in the nation, and that's something we might take for granted because it's right in our backyard. But people flock all over from the nation to be able to attend universities just like that. So we should be really appreciative of having that in our backyard. Obviously, if you're not watching from California, then that doesn't, both those comments don't apply to you. But they are great universities that we have at our disposal. So tuition fees and breakdowns, again, they're a little bit more expensive just when it comes to tuition in terms of compared to CSUs. But keep in mind, after, financial aid, grants, scholarships, these numbers do tend to dwindle down a little bit. So it sits right around $33,000, $34,000 range. And that's pretty consistent throughout the entire UC system. So you can pause this and look at it or come back to it later and kind of explore the numbers. So finally, we're going to talk about private schools, and I'm going to be speaking in a lot of kind of generalities with private schools because there's so many of them. There's 1,800 plus total institutions throughout the United States, and they offer Division I, II, and III athletic programs. So that's really where you can just get a variety of sports. Perhaps if you're a really talented athlete, get a scholarship to a Division I program. Division II and III athletic programs don't offer them typically. The difficulty of entry varies based on campus. I can't emphasize that more. Some private schools have a 4.5% acceptance rate. Some have a 90% acceptance rate. So there's a large spectrum. The main key difference with private schools is that they have smaller class sizes, so you won't see big lecture halls usually. They have smaller total sizes in terms of the whole campus. Therefore, you can get a much more individualized approach when it comes to your education. So if that is something that is important to you, then looking into private schools is something that you should do when you're researching your college list. They all typically follow the common application. The common application is similar to the single application for CSUs and the single application for UCs. The common application, you fill out a standard application, and then sometimes each school that you apply to has a little bit of separate information they want to know about you. So there's kind of work to be done for each school that you apply to. One thing to keep in mind is that they're typically more expensive. Because you are getting that smaller class size, because you are getting that more individualized approach, they can cost more money. We'll do a tuition breakdown a little bit later in the video with a private school. Oh, there you go. So don't let these numbers scare you. But there's a point I want to make, is that there's a stigma with private schools that, when you think private schools, you think Ivy League schools. And as you can see, the admissions rate and percentage is extremely low for a lot of the top Ivy Leagues and top schools in the country. And just thinking about, for example, at Columbia, those 40,203 people who apply are all extremely competitive applicants. They're very different than the 40,000 who would apply to a UC or a CSU. So Ivy Leagues are among the most competitive schools in the nation to be admitted to. But you don't need to go to an Ivy League institution or an Ivy-like institution to get a private school that works for you. There's private schools out there where you can get a similar education that you would get at a Cornell or a Harvard or a Penn that you can get at another private school that is a lot easier to get into and that works better for you. So don't think that all private schools are extremely competitive. You can make one work for you. So some of the requirements for private schools that we're going to be looking at, every private school differs so much that it would be very difficult for me to tell you the requirements for private schools. Certain schools have certain GPA requirements, certain restrictions to admission, but if you think private schools are for you, then definitely do the research. Do the research into which ones you think fit for you and just apply. Most, again, use the common application. We touched on that. And before you apply, understand that private schools are not funded by the state. That's the difference between private and public. And they also possess lower class sizes, which basically equals a higher tuition. It's definitely going to be a lot higher tuition than you have a public university. So one thing to look at is if you are someone who's interested in applying to Ivy League schools or competitive private schools, with test scores, they tend to be a little bit more strict. With UCs, you can get a very holistic approach, and sometimes you can get off the hook. But with private schools, you usually need to be between the ranges that they asked for, which is an interesting contrast or difference I've seen between public universities and private universities. You obviously are looking here on the right at this graphic of numbers at some of the most competitive schools in the nation. You really do need to fall within these ranges, which is both a little scary, but also very realistic to understand where you need to stand or where you might stand. So these ranges are pretty strict. Once in a while, they do admit people below and above these ranges, definitely above, but below these ranges, but they tend to be pretty standard. So that's something to keep in mind too when you're applying to private schools. So tuition fees for private schools, again, numbers will change with financial aid, scholarships, grants, all that stuff. But this is a tuition breakdown for Brown, which is an Ivy League school in Rhode Island. And this is really on the high end when it comes to tuition. I just wanted to put one of the highest schools I could find when thinking about it. So their tuition is $55,000, which is almost double that already of a CSU's total cost, which is a pretty scary number when you kind of look at it, for a first look. But again, if private schools are for you, then you'd be paying for a different type of education where you do receive services. But it's up to you to assess whether the number is worth it to receive those services. Of course, that number is subject to change based on your individual financial status. All right. So again, like I mentioned, the homework for this workshop is going to be to create your own college list, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But when you're creating that college list, what to look for in your college? What elements should you be considering? And there's, again, a stigma that you should go to the best academic college you get into, or the hardest college that you got into, and that is the best college. But the best college is the one that works best for you, and what works best for you can be based on a series of factors that can't be measured through simply acceptance rates and GPA and average test scores and things and prestige and rankings and some things that are ambiguous, such as that. So things to look for: location. Where's your university? Is it urban? Is it in a city? Is it tucked in a suburb? Is it its own little college town? Which of that do you prefer? Academic rigor. How hard is the campus? So if you know people there, that tends to be the best way to talk learn and talk to them about the academic rigor at that campus and kind of gauge, maybe you're looking for a 10 in terms of academic rigor. And you can ask people what they think in terms of the academic workload and the grading system at that school. Finances and tuition. So do you want to, shell out the money for a more expensive school? Are you looking to save money during this process, or are you saying I'm fully invested in my education? Academic flexibility. How easy is it to shift within majors? If you're someone who knows what they want to do, and you're set on that, then academic flexibility may not be that important to you. But if you're someone like me who wasn't 100% sure what they wanted to do and wanted that flexibility, then look for that in a university. UCs tend to offer that pretty well. Some private schools also offer that pretty well as well. I'm not sure about CSUs, but I'm sure they have that flexibility. But some schools have different systems set up than other schools. School size and classroom size, so those kind of go together. Do you want a big school or small school, public or private? Admissions rate, is this a school I can realistically get into? It's okay to reach, but also make sure your list of colleges is reachable. So next, on and off campus extracurriculars. So what type of other things can I be involved on besides studying and kind of having a bit of a social life? What type of extracurriculars does the school offer in terms of clubs and internships and work study programs, things like that? Demographics, is it maybe diversity is extremely important to you? So what is the race, religion, and socioeconomic background of the campus? Because you want that diverse background. Maybe you're someone who doesn't want that. Campus safety, is where I'm going to school safe? If safety is something that's important to you, some people, including myself, need that sense of safety so they can feel comfortable in their environment, and they feel like they can only be successful if they're comfortable. So if that's important to you, then you should obviously prioritize that. Greek life participation. Not all schools have Greek life. So is Greek life something that you could see yourself participating in, or you just want to have on your campus? And finally, any factor you choose to prioritize. So many people's lists can look different in terms of the factors they want to prioritize. If you create a top 10 list, is what I highly encourage you to do. Of these are the 10 factors that I prioritize, and some people location is number one. Some people Greek life participation is number one. So that's something to definitely think about. I know for like me, I had college gear, like the quality of the gear and the brand as one of them, and that was just important to me because I wanted to be able to rep some cool gear. Alright, so the homework for the next session is to use your newfound knowledge of CSUs, UCs, and private universities to create a manageable and realistic college list which considers all the factors mentioned in the previous slide. So if you go back here and you think about all these factors that we kind of worked through, plus any that you want to add, maybe make a list of those that are most important to you, and then find CSUs, UCs, and private universities that fit the mold of what you want. So this can only come through research. Select 5 to 10 colleges you feel fit your priorities and profile. Then what you should do is, after you've picked those colleges, compile their requirements and essay questions into a single Google Doc so that you can have everything sitting there. So for example, if you wanted to apply to UC Berkeley, then maybe you'd write UC Berkeley, and then you'd write some of their requirements. And when I say requirements, maybe some of their GPA ranges and test score ranges, just so you can kind of see where it is in the admissions rate. That's what I would put for requirements. And if they have any special requirements in terms of testing beyond the SAT and ACT, some schools, they want subject test scores, or they want X amount of AP tests taken. So in terms of those requirements, and then the essay questions. So I put the 4 personal insight questions, so I can see essentially what type of heavy work the application would require. Again, this will take detailed research, but it's definitely really worth it to seek out, do the research before, apply to a smaller amount of schools, and really know that you want to go to one of those schools instead of applying to a whole bunch, getting admitted maybe even to a bunch of them, and then just not knowing where your head's at and having to decide really quick and making rash decisions. This is right now where you really have to not only do your college applications, but pick where you'd like to apply and where you could see yourself realistically next year. So that is all for me. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you guys at the next workshop.